Saint Luke, also known as Luke the Evangelist, is one of the four authors of the New Testament Gospels. He is traditionally believed to be a physician and a companion of Saint Paul. Saint Luke is credited with writing the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, which provides a two-part account of the life of Jesus and the early Christian church. The Gospel of Luke emphasizes compassion, forgiveness, and the inclusion of marginalized groups. In this series, Father Benoit Standaert unpacks the writings of Saint Luke, bringing to us a greater understanding of this evangelist and his writings. As we approach Advent, this series would be instrumental in our preparation for the Gospel according to Saint Luke.
Then remains two episodes that we get after the birth of Jesus. It's the 40 day and after years in Nazareth when Jesus get 12 years. These two stories are again of high quality and full of deep allusions to the scriptures and to the future of Jesus in his personal life. The first one is famous in the Byzantine liturgy. They call that the Feast of the Encounter. The encounter between the parents of the child, who comes with the child and two doves, and they bring as an offer something for the purification of the mother, according to the law of Leviticus, the 40th day, the child must be brought to the temple and the mother by a sacrifice purified. Indirectly, we learn that they are of poor condition. In the law, they give the way of sacrificing. If you are rich, you can take a bull. If you are poor, even two turtles, two doves is enough to be brought. And Joseph has only two doves with him. And it shows the humble condition in the start of the life of Jesus when he arrives from Nazareth. That is one, they started, and 3 times it is said they do it according to the law of Moses, following the law as it is written. 3 times. At the opposite, we have Simeon and Hannah, and they come also to the temple, occasionally. Why? Not because of a convention according to the law. It is inspired conduct, moved by the Holy Spirit. They arrive and they speak as prophets, both Hannah and Simeon. And they speak about the child and the future of the child and about the mother and what she will suffer. A sword shall pierce her. So far, we receive information that will qualify the narrative. Jesus is great, light for the pagan nations and glory for Israel. But the mother will suffer. And why? Because also he will suffer. So you see the intensity of that moment and the relationship of the oracle of Simeon for the future. There are beautiful paintings where you see the parents giving in the hands of the old man, Simeon, the little child. And his inspiring speaking, which becomes the evening prayer of the night prayer of monks and so many pious people since centuries. Because the first words are, "And now, O Lord, you may let go your servant, because my eyes have seen." And in that, we hear that Simeon is ready to die, but we pray it because we are ready to sleep. And as the rabbis give us teaching, sleeping is 1/60th of the dead. They have a whole series of realities that are just 1/60th of. And so the sleep is the 60th part of the dead each night. As I explained, the one comes according to the law, the others come inspired by the Spirit. And the theologian Luke shows that these two authorities, the law and the Spirit, are not in contrast to one another. They confirm one another. There you see the original vision of Luke, who doesn't play with the traditional opposition we all know between institution and charisma. In this episode, the two confirm one another and reveal then the depth of what is the destiny of that child and the destiny even of the people. There's an interesting surprise. He mentions first the pagans and at the end the people of Israel. And most probably the future of his book is that first the pagans will be converted, and in a last reaction, the people of God who during the life and at the beginning of church did not want to join, they will also recognize the light and the glory revealed in Jesus. On that point, there is some similarity with what we find in the vision of Paul in Romans 9-11. There is a time for the nations, and there is, after the time of the nations, a possible time for conversion and recognizing who is Jesus for the messianic hope of the Jews. So far, let us then step over to the last episode of this 130 verses in Luke. We are back in Nazareth, and we hear that the family is going up to Jerusalem again. And the boy is 12 years. And they go not just by piety, but they respect the feast, and the feast is Easter. Now that little story must conclude the childhood and the infancy gospel, and must in a certain way also open to what will come afterwards, even if it is mysterious. And you know what happens? Jesus is somehow lost. He remains in Jerusalem apparently because the parents don't see him in the pilgrim group going back to Nazareth. So they are anxious and they come back, and it takes 3 days. And only after 3 days, remember these 3 days, they find him back in the temple and are very surprised. He's there in the middle of scribes, and they admire his response on all the questions that they are debating together. And you know the reaction of Mary, what did you do to us? Your father and I, we were looking for you. And he shows no empathy and no sadness that his parents for 3 days with anxious feelings were looking after him. Why did you look after me? You did not know that I had to be in the affairs of my father or in the house of my father. In Greek, it's a short word, only an article, entois, nelle cose, in the things of my father. And that can be the house, and that can be also the preoccupation of the values, the kingdom, the will, the name of God as we hear it in the Our Father when he prays. Anyhow, it is said explicitly by Luke that they did not understand what he was saying. And they went back. And Jesus also goes back with them and will grow and in wisdom also. It will take more than 20 years before we hear again about him. In the Gospel of Luke, this is the very first word of Jesus, with a reference to my Father in the temple of Jerusalem. He has an own vocation, and this is stronger than the relationships at home. And he makes it clear the day of his 12th year, where in the Hebrew tradition, the young guy has the maturity to speak for the first time in family and society. Well, his first word is the pure reference to my Father. They do not understand. Do we understand? Mary kept those words in her heart. The reader must do the same. But we had more information than Joseph, Mary, Elizabeth, and so on. We received the words of Gabriel to Zacharias and the word of Gabriel to Mary and the words of Simeon. We have a background to understand somehow the relationship between Jesus and God. But it will continue to be an enigma, a mystery. And it's good that it remains an enigma and a mystery, and that we will get new happenings where light will enter in the mystery to understand what's going on with Jesus. His last word is on the cross, and in his last word, again, the Father is there in a prayer. And we see that in Luke, he never prays except to the Father. In other Gospels, he can speak God or my God, by God. Why has to forget me? But in Luke, he doesn't say that word. And when he prays, he always mentions the name of Father. Even the prayer that we call Our Father is in Luke simply Father. Hallowed be thy name. And the rest. Shorter than in Matthew, but the beginning is already shorter. It's only Father. That's the real mystery, the reciprocity and the transparency that he, as a young person, has discovered in his life with God. Even in other Gospels, we will hear him saying, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? The family relationship is lower than the brotherly relationship because we have one common Father. And this brotherhood is inclusive of all. That is original and strong and still a challenge today, that we try to be inclusive brothers with all the differences of tongue and race and culture and so on. He, out of his idea, we have only one Father, the divine, the heavenly, and we are all brothers, concludes that this new family is more essential and has to be preferred and researched in our social and interpersonal relationships. Anyhow, we have here a mystery that will go on inside the Gospel until the last page and come back in the beginning of the Act of the Apostles, where the new family will start as a community in the Acts. I would like to clear a last detail to show that he's finishing something of the beginning and he's announcing something of the end. We know the last chapter, 24, that two persons left Jerusalem with sadness, and for 3 days they missed and lost their master, their Lord, and were exchanging about that. You see the symmetry. Mary and Joseph will come back to Jerusalem, and it will take 3 days. The disciples of Emmaus will leave Jerusalem, and after they have met Jesus, they come back to Jerusalem and announce, we have met the risen Lord, and it is confirmed by the meeting with those who say he is appeared to Peter also, to Simon. But you see, these are typical elements of narrative connections and inclusions between beginning and end done by the artist Luke, where you hear in the beginning a drama of being lost, the son, having lost the son, having lost the master, and finding him back after 3 days in the beginning and in the end of the gospel. When we reconsider the entire unit of 2 chapters to start his gospel, it is worthwhile to reflect on what happens in the space and what happened in the time, the topography and the chronology. I already mentioned some elements of the topography. I will just repeat it, but in parallel with what we will find in the chronology, it may be interesting. We start in the Temple of Jerusalem and in the heart of the temple, there where only the sons of Aaron may enter. Zachariah being a priest, and it was his turn to enter in the sacred space, and precisely there he meets an angel. And then we step 6 months later. Notice the chronology suddenly. It should happen at the same time. No, 6 months later. Happens in Nazareth, at the other side of the country. And the whole narrative will happen between the north and the south, between Jerusalem and Galilee, even with a stop in Bethlehem, which is surprising. It's no more Jerusalem as such. It's only 4, 5, 6 kilometers from the capital. But anyhow, it is the city of David, and by this way, it receives a lot of meaning in the narrative. But this basic topographical exchange between Judea, Jerusalem, and Galilee will be used in the structure of the rest of the narrative. We start in chapter 3 and 4 in Galilee, and slowly we go through Samaria, chapter 9, and chapter 17, and we arrive again in Jerusalem, chapter 19, 20, 21, and until the end. So, at the same time, the final chapter, 24, is essentially dominated by the city of Jerusalem, and even in the very last sentence, not just Jerusalem, but the temple. And they were continually in the temple praising God. Last verse of the Gospel. The Acts of the Apostles starts in Jerusalem and will go to the end of the world in a succession of waves to Samaria, to Galilee, to Antioch of Syria, to Ephesus, to Greece, and finally to Rome. The two narratives are in movement, but Jerusalem is the center of the theological geography of Luke, the place where all the prophetical promises find their fulfillment and have to be realized. So far, topography. Let us now have a look to the chronology mentioned in the narrative by the evangelist. We have exactly from the beginning of the birth and the talk with the angel in the temple of Jerusalem to the entrance of Jesus, that the child that the two parents bring to the temple the 40th day after the birth, we have exactly 490 days. 6 months between the two births, and then 9 months for the birth of the second child, that is 150 together. That is 15 months together, yeah? And then 40 days. And when you count that, the 15 months is 450 days, and 40 is 490 days. Well, this chronology has been studied by René Laurentin in the 50s of last century. And he said, but that has to do with the famous prophecy of Daniel in chapter 9, verse 24. And there we read, 70 weeks. 70 weeks, 77 is 490. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your holy city. Then transgression will stop and sin will end. Guilt will be expiated. Everlasting justice will be introduced. Vision and prophecy ratified, and a most holy will be anointed. See, in one verse, you get the content of what happens with Jesus entering in the history. He is the one, as also Zacharias has said, through him we have forgiveness of sins. It is the merciful kindness, the loving kindness of God that has been manifested in the life and the prophecy of Jesus. Well, this is exactly 70 weeks are decreed for your people. And so Luke is speaking with all those numbers, very precise, is speaking us about what happened from the first message of the angel in the temple until the meeting with the two inspired people, Simeon and Hannah, at the end of that narrative. Now I want still to say a few words that may surprise us, how we are depending on the chronology and the notices of chronology given by Luke. I already mentioned that daily we follow Luke with the three canticles of Mary, Zachariah, and Simeon. In the morning, Zachariah, in the evening, Mary, and before the beginning of the night, Simeon. A second element, 3 times a day we hear the bell in the most of the monasteries and even in some parishes for the Angelus. And the Angelus is the angel that comes to Mary. And she says, "Here is the servant of the Lord," and the Word became flesh, and so on. The first sentence of the Angelus are all taken from Mary, from Luke. So daily we have in memory the structure of the time taken over by Luke, out of the book of Luke. It's the same with the rosary. Take the 5 first motifs of the rosary, they all come from the childhood of Jesus according to Luke, starting with the Annunciation. So again, we are strictly depending on the narratives of Luke. Even the calendar of Christmas, the day itself is 6 months after the birth of John. And this is also in our calendar. So John is born, remembered, the 24th of June, exactly 6 months before the 25th of December. These 6 months are there. When the angel comes in Nazareth, it is 6 months later. And what she hears out the mouth of Gabriel, Elizabeth is pregnant already in her 6th month. Because this distance is respected in our liturgical calendar. Also, Christmas Day, a week later, you have the 1st of January, the feast and the gospel of the circumcision of Jesus and the giving of his name. In some calendars, the day after 1st January will be the day of the name of Jesus. But the name is given at the circumcision, and the circumcision is precisely on 1st January. The Jews told me, "You are more Jewish than you think and than you know." Why? Because we don't remember the date of our birth as anniversary, but the day of our circumcision, 7 days later. And you start the year not in Christmas, but the day that Jesus has been circumcised. You are more Jewish than you know by yourself. Interesting remark. But the cycle of Christmas finishes with the 2nd February, where Jesus is presented in the temple and where Simeon pronounced his oracle exactly 40 days after Christmas. You see, Christmas, a week later, the circumcision, 40 days later, the presentation in the temple, at the meeting with Simeon and Anna. The whole Christmas cycle is depending from Luke. And the same happens with Easter. The calendar of Easter, 40 days after Easter, we have Ascension. 50 days after the resurrection, we have Pentecost. Well, this comes all from Luke. And you don't find any trace of that in Mark, Matthew, or John. So, what would have been our calendar for day and year without Luke? We are really depending on him, and he has given structures. Even the 27 books of the New Testament, the basic of the organization of that is, in a certain sense, Lucan, because his gospel and the Acts of the Apostles together give the structure of the four Gospels and all the letters of the Apostles that follow, with then finally the Apocalypse as conclusion. So let us be thankful for the role that Luke has been able to transmit and the way we as church are receiving all those hints and constructing our time and our space in dependence of him. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth.